Question for people in other countries. Do you want to visit us anymore?
No, just flat out no. And the ones who do want to go to the US, it's because they do not truly understand what it's like to actually live in the US. So I'm gonna break it down for you. The American dream is dead. America is for the wealthy and nobody else. Another thing is, I'm afraid of being unalived at every single point, like I step out of the house, whether it be the grocery store, at a restaurant, it doesn't matter. And I'm a privileged person. I am a white person, and I am afraid of the pew-pews. I cannot even imagine what it's like for people who don't have my skin tone. Another thing, it's very hard for me to make friends being outside the US, like even for a year. Like, it's one of two things. Either they get this look on their face where I'm just like, okay, they just really don't care, or they see me as bragging. Also, the food is designed to make us sick, and don't even get me started on healthcare.
America sees itself as the land of the free and home of the brave. But its own citizens and non-Americans don't always agree.
The best way I've heard it described to make sense for like the average person is that we're similar to the Fire Nation in Avatar: The Last Airbender. So the Fire Nation was told about how great they were and how like war was one way to kind of spread their greatness and share it with everyone else. But that's not really the truth, right? The Fire Nation just went around spreading war because they wanted to take stuff from other people. So this kind of draws parallels with the current United States. We kind of claim that we're for freedom and democracy and everything, but when you look at where we start wars, it's usually for an economic or political reason. You think it's a coincidence that we just happen to start wars in all these places that are very oil rich? But yeah, the reason the US is hated worldwide is because we go around doing a bunch of sketchy shit.
I'm curious on like Europeans' opinions on why they don't like Americans.
I'm an American that's been living in Amsterdam for about 8 years now. I'm completely integrated. My partner is Dutch, which is why I moved out here. I speak the language. I've got primarily Dutch friends. And here are some of the reasons why I have found that the Dutch, particularly, don't like American. So the Dutch mentality is all about nuchterheid is the word that they use. And it's about being down to earth. It's about being level-headed. It's about being just like everybody else. Nobody is better than anybody else. And if you look at the American mentality, it's completely the opposite. It's about trying to be better than everybody else, trying to be the star, trying your hardest to be something. They find that type of mentality completely rude, dishonest, and how they like to call it, fake. The second biggest reason is because Americans are brought up with the idea that America is better than everybody else, this savior complex that they saved everybody, they are the example, and that couldn't be further from the truth. If you look at things like gun control, healthcare, safety, equality, I mean, the US is the worst. Not admitting to that is something that they completely hate. And lastly, I don't know why, but there is this view that Americans are dumb. We are just dumb to them. I think that's something we're never going to be able to change. They're always just going to view the American mentality, the American mindset as just dumb. After 8 years living here, I can safely say that I totally agree with the Dutch mentality and I share their view on us Americans, sadly. As much as I love my American friends and my American family, I don't love my country, and I only saw freedom and opportunity until I left it.
I've seen a lot of Black Americans asking why Africans hate them, and I'm going to answer the question for you. Number one, this American ego transcends race. It doesn't matter if you're white American, brown American, or Black American. There seems to be like this ego that makes you think that you are the main character wherever you go. Therefore, when you go to places in Africa, you get surprised when you're treated like just another tourist. I've heard people saying stuff like, they only cared about my dollars. Yeah, this is a supermarket. You've gone there expecting a kinship and connection with people whose history diverges from your history. And those slave ships took off, the countries that, you came from, they went on. There were still things happening to them, and there's still things happening to them today. Your history isn't as shared as you think that it is. There isn't this kind of Black kind of community in a lot of countries in Africa because everyone's Black. I would get it if you were in Sweden and you're walking past another Black person and they didn't smile at you and it's like, we are the only Black people here, like in this city. I'd get it. But you can't go to Africa and expect Black people to care that you're Black. And also, it's not a hate of Black Americans. there's a hatred of Americans in general. A lot of places do not have a great history with America. And while it's very much clear to us that we can live in countries like England with terrible histories and who are right now selling billions of pounds and arming places like Israel, we can understand that within these countries there are different politics, there's different dynamics, there's still social hierarchies. We cannot expect people who are on the receiving end of the violence of the countries that we live in to care that we are not at the top of the social hierarchy here. But I get called European child by my own relatives who I am literally biologically related to. Because nobody cares, because I was raised in Europe, so I might as well be white to them. Can't go to other countries and bring the race dynamics of your countries to theirs. And there are places where you go where people won't treat you like that. People will accept you and will be like, oh, I'm so happy that you're here. But you guys keep going to places that are heavily populated by tourists, by American soldiers, and a lot of these American soldiers are black. And then you're acting surprised when people aren't that, shocked and happy to see you. So to conclude, it's not that they hate you, it's that they don't care about you.
I just learned about something absolutely absurd that we do here in the US that no one else in the entire world does. Here in the US, we incarcerate people under the age of 18, 13 and up, for life. So there are teenagers that get sentenced to prison for life. They can die in the prison. They will die in prison. In 2020, an average of 1,162 children were arrested every single day. And, as you can imagine, because it's exactly the same with adults, Black children are disproportionately affected. 22 states in the US have yet to ban children getting life in prison without the possibility of parole. I'll give you a guess as to which some of those states are.
Here's a sample of what the rest of the world thinks of the United States. Green means you have a favorable opinion of the US, blue, unfavorable. A lot of these tie into current events, like Poland's sky-high 93% rating, which makes sense given our mutual support for Ukraine. The overall results will be a bit surprising to those of us who remember the 2000s and the unpopularity of the Iraq War. Today, nearly twice as many respondents have a favorable view of the US as an unfavorable view. I think the result that's going to surprise Americans the most is just how unpopular we are in Australia, where nearly half the population has a negative view of the United States. And that's in direct contrast to how warmly Americans view Australia. If you take the two positive categories and combine them from this survey, Australia is the top country that Americans view favorably. What gives? Why do they dislike the US so much down under? I have some thoughts. Not only am I a historian and a policy geek, but I spent every summer of my teenage years traveling around Australia. And the first thing to remember is that Australians all learned in history class that they spent the last century playing second fiddle to the imperial ambitions of their British colonial overlords and then on the behalf of America in Vietnam and the Gulf War. For example, one of the biggest blockbusters of the 1980s was the movie about the Battle of Gallipoli, starring none other than a young Hottie McToddy, Mel Gibson over here, where British officers callously threw Australian troops at prepared Turkish trenches. In the 1960s, Australians very much felt that once again, Australian troops were being sent, this time to Vietnam, to fight for the imperial ambitions, this time of America, instead of Britain. The largest per capita anti-war protests in the world were actually in Australia. And so for many Australians in the 90s and the aughts, it felt like Australia was repeating that history all over again, this time in the Middle East. But the thing that I actually heard the most as a teenager in Australia, especially in the 90s, was a sense that the US wasn't playing fair with Australian farmers. Now, you and I don't spend a lot of time thinking about agricultural policy, but it's a big deal in Australia. It is a net exporter of all kinds of agricultural goods, especially sheep. I remember sitting in a ute, a truck, with an Australian farmer who was just spitting mad at Bill Clinton for hypocritically lowering tariffs with Mexico and Canada as part of NAFTA, but raising tariffs on lamb exports from Australia. The US is used to getting its own way regardless of what anybody else thinks about it. But imperial entanglements and trade protectionism makes us enemies where we should be making friends.
America will bomb your country until there's nothing left, then come back 20 years later and make a movie about how sad their soldiers got from doing it. You're not wrong. Let's talk about the American military movie complex. And I haven't even watched this yet, but isn't that exactly the plot of Cherry? Generally, war movies are probably like my least favorite genre. 1917 is one that stands out. That's pretty damn good. But yeah, I think we all know how a lot of these movies are just used for propaganda anyway. But what is a lot less commonly known is that the Department of Defense sponsors so many movies that aren't even war movies, which then also get used as means of propaganda. Because if you want to use military equipment in your movie, you have to apply directly to the Department of Defense, and who then have to approve your script. They have criteria that you have to meet to even get approved, so a lot of the time, military cannot look like the villains in your movie. Transformers, DoD sponsored. Godzilla, DoD sponsored. DoD sponsored. DoD sponsored. And if you wait to the credits, you can see it. Top Gun is the best example of this because this whole movie is just used to rebrand the American military after Vietnam.
America is not what it once was. I've got some bad news for people who don't travel internationally. The world hates us, okay? We're not the big dogs. We don't have the clout that we once had. We aren't even like statistically on top of anything, education or anything anymore. And I've traveled a lot internationally. Over COVID, obviously, I stopped. And there's always been an underlying tone that America is dangerous. But you know, we run Hollywood, so a lot of the media that is consumed by people in other countries is still American. However, I'm on my first international trip since COVID, and it has gotten worse. I have heard from every nationality that America is dangerous, but I arrived in Indonesia, which is a country that, you know, a lot of people aim to get out of and go to America. And the first thing that my taxi driver says to me is that he's afraid of America because of all the poppy seeds that we're taking and all the jazz powder that people are using. And he's convinced that people are walking around the US like zombies. Because that's what's on the internet. That's what these people are seeing. And I think it's a really big lesson if you are sheltered and are not leaving the US. We don't got it. Like, we don't got it anymore. People don't want to live in America. People aren't eager to live in America. When I was in Europe, a lot of the kids said their parents wouldn't let them go to America because they were afraid they were going to get popped by the police. Like, those are the fears. The only fear that Americans have when their children travel overseas is that they're going to be, like, in the movie Taken, which is a very small possibility. And they just use that as a fear. I don't even, like, that's not really even a founded fear. People aren't taking Americans when we go, because you know how big of a hell case they would raise if some little white girl went missing? That's not what's happening. But what is happening is other people from other nations are going to America and bad things are happening to them. So, just a reminder, we ain't shit.
My entire series on how the world views the US highlights the concept of how all of us were raised to believe we live in the greatest nation in the world. We were taught, or perhaps indoctrinated, that everyone around the globe just wanted to move here so badly, and that America is the promised land. Now, many of us today know that this simply isn't true, that there aren't people around the world necessarily desperate to come here the way that we thought that they did. And not only do they not necessarily want to come here or even visit here, even if they were continually paid to do so, they would turn it down. So answer me this question, please. Why are there still so many Americans desperate to believe that we are the absolute greatest in the world, in spite of people all around the world telling us that we are so backwards? Most nations do not have this superiority complex like we do. You'd think that we might just take a lesson in humility from other countries who learn what doesn't work and implement new ways of being. But instead, us Americans, we double down on what doesn't work. Make it make sense.
One thing I've learned about being an American who travels a lot is one of the reasons people hate Americans is because we try to make their culture be like ours. In particular, to the way we order food. In America, it's all about customer service, right? The customer's always right. Customer gets to do whatever they want. They spoil brat, and you can't really say shit. That's changing a little bit, but in general, that's still the rule, right? Over here, they don't play that shit. In Europe, they do not play that shit. The customer is not always right. You can't ask for stuff on the side. You can't ask for replacements. You can't ask for the kids menu, like if you're an adult. You can't send the food back if you don't like it, like none of that. And the problem is that Americans think that that's how the whole world functions, because Americans don't really travel like that. It's so expensive to fly in and out of America, and even within America. Have you guys noticed that? So we're not very well traveled.
This is how I know Americans think that the world revolves around them. I'm American. I'm in America right now. Today's doomsday for us, right? It's the last day that the app is going to be on until it goes dark for the next 3 days or whatever the heck is going to happen. And I'm looking and I'm scrolling and I'm seeing people on TikTok shop live and like selling stuff and doing all this stuff. And I'm like, why are you doing that? The world is ending right now. And then I sat there introspectively and I was like, Talia, be smart. Not everybody that you see on your For You page is American or is in America. They may be aware of the situation, but it's not affecting them like that because they may be in the UK or in a Latin country or somewhere else. Yeah.
And I have absolutely changed my opinions since starting the series on how the world views the US about 6 months ago. I was genuinely under the impression that the world viewed us negatively during the Trump administration, but that was a kind of brief period in our history, and otherwise we were viewed fairly favorably. People not wanting to move to the US predates Trump. We are not the best country in the world where everybody has always wanted to move and they'll do anything to get here. Sure, some people do that, but not the way we're led to believe. Americans have been indoctrinated into believing that we are the best. In fact, we have a World Series that only contains American teams. And one of my biggest takeaways from the series is the hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of comments from people all around the world saying if they were paid to, they would not move to the US, let alone visit.
Americans are not a monolith, and therefore there are many Americans who do not believe they deserve this bad reputation, especially when it comes to them being obnoxious.
As an American traveling around Europe, we had to talk about this. I'm currently in Finland, but most countries that go to around Europe always talk about how Americans are self-centered and how the world always revolves around the US. But the crazy part is, when I turn on the news, it's American politics. And even when I was playing basketball at the local courts in Finland, the kids were speaking American English. They were saying stuff like, "Oh, you're garbage, bro," or "Pass me the ball," but then mixed in with Finnish. They call it Finnish English. And the wildest part, the thrift stores. Come look at this. 90% of the thrift stores I've been to all have American gear. Colleges, pro teams, NFL teams, basketball teams, everything. They even got a proud to be an American shirt in Finland. Even with the food. The Cool Ranch Doritos literally say Cool American. Bruh. Though some Americans can be a bit proud, it's not really our fault. You go anywhere around the world and the American influence is everywhere, and we can't really help that.
You can't make it up, can you? It's comments like this. They don't just happen on TikTok. They happen off of TikTok as well. And it's so unnecessary. American people. So this is what I'm trying to say with all of this. One, people hear me talk, and if they don't know I'm Canadian, they don't follow me here, they don't know me in real life, they'll often assume that I'm American. I'm Canadian. But this is what everybody thinks of me when I open my mouth. Now, before you say, it's not everybody, it's just a few ignorant people. No, I would say it happens on a daily basis. There will be some comment, some, it's just banter, it's just a joke, babes. Like, I've got a few comments like that on this thread, and it's not. Because you would not like if someone was constantly dissing where you come from. And I don't come from America, but people often assume that I come from America, and it's still meant and said as a bad thing, and it's not cool. So for me, I'm starting to feel convicted because a lot of the things as a Canadian that I do are very similar to an American. So how can I sit here and be like, ugh, cretins of the earth, Americans, but I do so many things sound like them, etc. So I don't know, I think maybe you should maybe go educate yourself a bit more. There's always going to be stereotypes of every single society. If I went into some of the British stereotypes that I see here, let's be real, I would probably have death threats. I would probably have someone telling me I need to stop whinging, moaning, etc. But there are things that I see here in England that I equally would say is obnoxious and uncouth.